The winter wind tore through the crowded Chicago bus station like a blade, but no one felt its bite more than the tiny girl sitting alone on the icy bench, her thin legs braced in worn orthopedic supports, her small hands trembling as she held a faded backpack against her chest. People rushed past her without noticing, unaware that only minutes earlier, a woman, her own mother, had walked away without looking back. The child's breath shook as she tried to stay upright, her legs too weak to stabilize her. And on the other side of the street stood a man with everything except someone to come home to, watching the heartbreaking scene unfold in a way that would change all their lives forever. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of helping someone who can't help themselves, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories to life. Carter Hayes had built his name across the skyline of Chicago. At 43, he was one of the youngest CEOs to lead an infrastructure empire, a man respected, admired, envied, and utterly alone. His life was a maze of meetings, deals, and empty penthouse nights that echoed louder than any corporate victory. He never paused at bus stops, never stared at strangers, and never allowed the outside world to tug at the parts of him he had long sealed shut. But that morning, while stopping for coffee on his way to a board meeting, a small figure caught his attention, a little girl with strawberry blonde hair tied in a crooked ponytail, her coat far too thin for the biting cold, her braces scratched and bent as if they had survived more storms than she had. She was about 7, maybe 8, but something in her posture, rigid, strained, trying hard not to cry, made her look both younger and heartbreakingly older. Carter watched as she scanned the crowd for someone who was no longer coming. Her hopeful gaze shifted left and right, then up toward the street where a woman had disappeared not even 4 minutes earlier. His chest tightened. He didn't know the child, didn't know her story, but every instinct inside him whispered that something was terribly wrong. The girl's name was Hannah Rose, though he didn't learn that until much later. For now, he only knew the silent panic radiating from her. The moment she tried to stand, her legs wobbled beneath her, and she sat back down with a quiet sound of pain. People glanced at her, briefly, dismissively, before hurrying on. No one bothered to ask why a disabled child was alone in the freezing wind at a bus stop at 7 in the morning. But Carter wasn't like other people. Not anymore. He felt something stir inside him, an old memory, a scar of abandonment he carried from his own childhood before he'd ever dreamed of corner offices or penthouse views. His father had walked out one night and never returned. The pain had shaped him, hardened him, and left him wary of attachments. Yet staring at this little girl struggling to hold herself together, something inside him cracked. He crossed the street without thinking, the sound of slush crunching beneath his shoes echoing through the empty space between them. Hannah noticed his shadow before she saw his face. Her shoulders flinched, instinctive and cautious like someone who had learned not to trust too quickly. She held her backpack tighter, as though it was the only protection she had left. Carter kept a respectful distance, his voice low, reassuring, and gentle, but the girl didn't speak. Her lips quivered as if she wanted to answer but couldn't risk believing anyone might help her. She kept her gaze on the ground, on her braces, on the tiny puddle of melting snow beneath her feet. In that moment, Carter understood far more than she could say. He saw fear. He saw confusion. But worst of all, he saw recognition, the kind a child develops only after being let down too many times. He removed his coat, heavy and warm, and placed it softly around her shoulders. Hannah stiffened for a second, but the warmth of the coat wrapped around her like shelter she never expected. Her small voice trembled as she finally whispered a few words. She said her mom told her to wait right here and that she would be back soon. But the fading footprint tracks and the bus departing minutes earlier told a different story. A crueler one. One that made Carter's stomach twist. He stayed with her, unsure of what to do but knowing she shouldn't be alone. He canceled his meeting. He sent a message to his assistant. He quietly asked if anyone had seen the woman who left Hannah moments before. They had. A few people described her walking away quickly, not toward a store or restroom, but toward a cab she entered without hesitation. And she didn't return. The truth settled like frost on Carter's skin, the child had been abandoned deliberately. The hours that followed were a blur of attempts to reach emergency contacts written inside her backpack, a series of phone calls that led nowhere, and cold realities that made even the hardened CEO swallow hard. Hannah's mother had given a disconnected number. No relatives answered. No one at her school picked up. Hannah didn't know her address well enough to guide anyone. All she knew was that her mom had been crying a lot the past few weeks and had said she couldn't do this anymore. Carter understood too well what desperation felt like, but this, leaving a disabled child alone in the cold, went beyond desperation. It was betrayal. By the time he escorted Hannah into a warm cafe, her eyes had lost their earlier fear and shifted into a quiet fatigue no child should carry. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. She just held the mug of warm cocoa with both hands and whispered, "I'm not supposed to be a problem." Those words shattered him. Carter knew he couldn't leave her to the system that had failed so many children like him years ago. He contacted social services, but the thought of handing Hannah over to strangers made his heart clench. Something inside him rebelled against it. He wanted to protect her, not out of pity, but because she deserved more than being treated like a burden the world kept passing off from one hand to another. The social worker who arrived was kind but overwhelmed, juggling too many cases and too few solutions. She said they'd try to find a temporary placement, though options were limited. Hannah stayed silent as adults discussed her fate, shrinking into her oversized coat like she wanted to disappear. But Carter couldn't shake the image of her alone on that bench, trembling in the cold. He felt something shift inside him, a resolve he hadn't expected. A decision that surprised even the social worker. He asked what steps were required to take temporary guardianship. The social worker blinked in disbelief. CEO or not, guardianship wasn't a small responsibility. But Carter insisted. He answered every question, provided every document, offered his penthouse as safe housing, and promised to follow every rule necessary. It wouldn't be immediate, they needed paperwork, checks, approvals, but the social worker agreed that he could accompany Hannah until arrangements were finalized. Hannah stayed close to him the rest of the day, unsure but no longer terrified. When he helped her into his car, she whispered a small, "Thank you." He blinked hard, feeling something unfamiliar rise in his throat. Over the next days, something extraordinary unfolded. Carter arranged special equipment for her mobility, hired a physical therapist to visit daily, and filled his once silent home with warmth, soft lights, and laughter he hadn't heard in years. The girl who once curled into herself slowly blossomed. She smiled more, asked questions, listened to the rain against the glass walls at night with wonder. She began to trust him. And Carter, a man who had built skyscrapers out of ambition and loneliness, realized he was building something far more meaningful now, a family. But every story finds its storm. After nearly 2 months of transformation, after paperwork, hearings, emotional nights, and hesitant smiles, a woman showed up at his office reception crying that she wanted her daughter back. It was Hannah's mother. Exhausted, unstable, overwhelmed, she explained the mistakes she had made. She said she wasn't ready then but had sought help and treatment, and now she wanted to make things right. Carter's heart fractured. Hannah had begun calling his home our place. She had learned to walk short distances without holding onto the wall. She had drawn pictures of him and taped them to the refrigerator. He didn't want to lose her. But love, true love, puts the child first. With a heavy heart, Carter allowed supervised meetings. Hannah's reaction surprised everyone. She didn't cling to him or turn away in fear. She was quiet, thoughtful, assessing. In the end, after several sessions, she asked Carter if both families could love her. And the truth was, they could. Carter didn't lose her. Instead, they created a shared arrangement where Hannah lived safely with her mother but spent weekends and holidays with the men who had shown her what unconditional care looked like. It wasn't about ownership. It was about love, healing love. And the little girl abandoned at a bus stop grew into a confident child supported by 2 homes that learned forgiveness, compassion, and second chances.